morning. First, many thanks to the Department of Economics at the University of Kerala and Dr. Anita for hosting this conference. My heartfelt thanks also to Dr. PJ Christabel, who's an economist committed to social justice and who is an expert on Kudumbashree and microfinance, for all the hard work in organizing this conference. It is an honor and a privilege to present in this forum where intellectual giants like Dr. Kunyaman have presented. In this presentation, I will give you an overview of my research, present the rationale for my considering Kudumbashree a food justice initiative, and briefly compare Kudumbashree JLGs, so joint liability groups, to food justice initiatives in North America. So, welcome one and all. Let's take a look at Kudumbashree collective group farming. In the lush green spaces of God's own country, as the state of Kerala, India proudly calls itself, and I must say, before I proceed, thank you so much for this opportunity to present in my motherland, my Mathrubhumi today. So in the lush green spaces of God's own country, as the state of Kerala, India proudly calls itself, 330,000 women are engaged in farming in small groups of 4 to 10, organized in about 69,000 groups, 68,838 groups to be exact, based on my interview with the assistant program officer in the State Agricultural Mission, spearheaded by Kudumbashree, the state poverty eradication mission. Under that, the women group farmers are part of a quiet revolution. They grow crops for family consumption as well as for profit. In the process, they are creating pathways for the practice of food justice in their families, their neighborhoods, and the entire state. Community-based food justice initiatives, such as Kudumbashree group farming, offer a glimmer of hope in the context of pockets of stark hunger on a global scale. Women enter the program as cultivators with control over decision-making rather than as agricultural laborers who are wage earners, bringing fallow and cultivable agricultural land into productive use. They are given subsidies and access to credit, forming joint liability groups. Each JLG is part of a neighborhood group of 10 to 15 women called Ayalkootam in Malayalam. 5 voting members from each neighborhood group participate in electing their leaders. Several neighborhood groups or Ayalkootams join together to elect 7 members who together form an area development society at the level of an administrative ward. The 7 ADS members then elect 1 representative to send to the CDS or Community Development Society at the Panchayat level. The CDS members from all the wards together elect a CDS chair. These community development societies operate at the level of local self-government, LSG, called Panchayat, which has been prevalent in India for thousands of years. Kudumbashree group farmers refer to themselves as JLGs, joint liability groups, in everyday conversations, and therefore at times I refer to them as KJLGs in this presentation. Let me share an excerpt from the interviews in my study, which will give you a feel for the magic which is transpiring in Kerala in Kudumbashree group farms. Meera, this is a fictitious name, who's the chairperson of the CDS, or Community Development Society, which is part of the 3-tier system we talked about, has this to say. In the olden days, men were doing all the farming and other works, and it was a male-dominant society. But with the start of Kudumbashree, women began to come out of the houses courageously and started to do the activities. At the beginning time of Kudumbashree, men teased us and mocked us that we would leave this after 2 or 3 days of working with agricultural implements. But women proved to be much better than men in their efficiency and skill in farming. Teamwork is more productive and effective than individual work. When one does these types of activities alone, they may feel bored or tired. Majority of our JLGs are in the high performance list. They made this achievement by their own hard work without seeking help from men at any time. Now let's take a look at the rationale for my study and the case selection. First, there are only a few empirical studies on the learning dimension in the food movement. Second, there is a notable deficiency of empirical studies on both food justice and the learning dimension from the global south, which is where Kerala is located. Third, there is a paucity of studies on the practice of food justice. So 2 Kudumbashree JLGs, 1 tribal and 1 general were chosen, both with a high level of success with the assistance of the Kudumbashree state and district missions. So what is the purpose of my study? The purpose of this study is to understand how the learning dimension contributes to capacity building in the following food justice initiatives of the State Poverty Eradication Mission. Kudumbashree in Kerala, India. Collective group farming is the first initiative. Then there's Padeyam, food for the destitute, COVID-19 community kitchens, and Janakiya hotels, which are meals for the commoner. Today, we'll just be focusing on the collective group farming because of time constraints, but during the question and answer time, if you have questions about the other initiatives, we can talk about that. So the primary research question of the study is, how does the learning dimension contribute to capacity building in community-based food justice initiatives? The secondary research questions pertain to how the learning dimension contributes to capacity building, Kudumbashree's role in fostering such learning, and women's empowerment. So next, let's take a look at my methods. It's a case study with 2 cases, entirely qualitative data, semi-structured individual interviews with the assistance of an on-site interpreter. So of the following groups, some of the members of each study group, Kudumbashree elected representatives, Kudumbashree officials and staff, and a focus group with the district program officers for agriculture from all the 14 districts. With the focus groups, we had a sponsored lunch sponsored by the research team and tours of the farms. And I was overwhelmed and overjoyed is the word, not overwhelmed, overwhelmed in a positive way. I was overjoyed with the level of affection and openness with which the women of both the study groups embraced me. So the data analysis and interpretation, the interviews were translated from Malayalam and transcribed into English primarily by the on-site interpreter and secondarily by a few other transcribers. Coding was done utilizing an interpretation-focused coding strategy expounded by Adu 2019 in his book titled A Step-by-Step Guide to Qualitative Data Coding. I did line-by-line open coding as in the grounded theory method through building analytical memo tables as suggested in this book. I coded the data using MaxQDA, which is a qualitative data analysis software. Now, my research study focuses on how participatory learning, again, in India, we would say participatory. So you have to forgive these little accent differences. My research study focuses on how participatory learning contributes to capacity building for the practice of food justice. I'm just sharing one illustrative example of how the learning dimension contributes to the building of member capacities. In the theoretical framework put forth by Foster Fishman et al., 4 types of capacities, namely member, relational, organizational, and programmatic are discussed. Of these, I'm only giving you one example from one type of capacity since I'm focusing on the practice of food justice in this presentation and because of time constraints of not being able to go to the learning pathways into capacity building. So the name and type of capacity is member capacity. Under the umbrella of member capacities, effective communication skills, and illustrations from the data of the learning process which contribute to the building of capacity. This is the illustration. At the time of my first Kudumbashree meeting itself, I was chosen as the president of our unit, neighborhood group or Ayalkootam. Honestly, at the moment, I did not know how to present a presidential speech. Within a period of 6 months, I was trained a lot by Kudumbashree and the Panchayat. I acquired a great deal of knowledge which I could not acquire from my schooling from first standard to a higher secondary level. Kudumbashree played a vital role in my holistic development as a woman. I was being changed over time to be a stronger woman who knows how to deliver a speech, how to communicate with others. I learned everything from Kudumbashree. And if you see her now, you will not believe that this is how she learned. She's one of the most articulate people whom you've ever seen. She's the Community Development Society Chair, Meera, again a fictitious name. And what are the relevant theoretical frameworks here? Transformational Learning by Mezi Rao, 1981. Situated Learning by Lave and Wenger, 1991. Informal Learning and Non-Formal Learning from Sugarinsky, 2000. And how did Kudumbashree non-formal education relate? How did it help with this specific illustration? So the Kudumbashree non-formal training for leaders of neighborhood groups and definitely CDS chairs, that contributed to our illustration, the development of Meera, and the Kudumbashree affiliated non-formal education at the panchayat level for farmers, because she is also part of a JLG, a farming group. Okay, so now that we have looked at the learning dimension, let's take a look at the food justice aspect. What is food justice? Gottlieb and Joshi define food justice as ensuring that the benefits and risks of where, what, and how food is grown and produced, transported, and distributed, and accessed and eaten are shared fairly. And this is a definition that is well exemplified by Kudumbashree JLGs. What makes a food-related initiative a food justice initiative? Kudu and Slocum have done extensive research on food justice. They emphasize that in their view and the view of other scholars and advocates for food justice whom they have studied, the following 4 areas, which are also called nodes, are critical characteristics of food justice initiatives. Sensitivity to these nodes. And these nodes are trauma and inequity, exchange, land, and labor. So let's take a look at food justice characteristic node 1, sensitivity to trauma and inequity. The characteristic is acknowledging and confronting historical collective social trauma and persistent race, gender, and class inequalities, according to Kudu and Slocum. How does Kudumbashree adhere to this node? The creation of group farming initiative was in and of itself a response to the trauma and inequity experienced by women in Kerala in the latter half of the 20th century. Following the large-scale fallowing of farming land, that's a tongue twister there, accompanied by increasing dependence for food products on other Indian states. Women were the worst hit. Men who lost opportunities in farming were able to migrate and find new occupations, while the women, presumably due to their caring for families and young children, stayed behind in their unproductive farming contexts. So what did Kudumbashree do? Changed it into a productive farming context by creating the KJLGs. Then, extreme poverty by itself is viewed by Kudumbashree as a trauma, as it should be. Such an orientation is made abundantly clear by the development and statewide adoption of 9-point indices for identifying poor families, who are then a high priority target for recruitment into Kudumbashree. Now let's take a look at other food justice characteristics, nodes 2 and 4, exchange and labor. Designing exchange mechanisms that build communal reliance and control, and pursuing labor relations that guarantee a minimum income and are neither alienating nor dependent on unpaid social reproduction by women. That is the definition or the explanation of the characteristic by Kudu and Slocum. How does Kudumbashree adhere to these nodes? The code with the highest number of frequencies in my study was the code titled Income Generation via Kudumbashree. This was not even a question in my semi-structured interviews, but women volunteered this information and it had the highest frequencies. So Kudumbashree is paying close attention to issues of exchange and fair remuneration. KJLGs get farm loans at 2% interest. NABARD provides 5% interest subsidy on loans taken at 7% interest. And NABARD is the National Association for Banking and Rural Development. So there's just a 2% subsidy for the women to pay, for 2% interest, sorry, for the women to pay. And in Kerala, Kudumbashree has become the program implementing agency of Mahila Kisan Shashakti Kiran Pariyojana, another tongue twister for me. MKSP, the Empowered Women Farmers Development Program, which has extended the exchange of services and funds beyond the borders of Kerala. So then let's take a look at, hold on for a second. Okay, the next node, food justice characteristic node number 3. According to Kadiyo and Slocum, this is creating innovative ways to control, use, share, own, manage, and conceive of land and ecologies in general that place them outside the speculative market and the rationale of extraction. Kadiyo and Slocum. So how does Kudumbashree adhere to this node? Can you hold on for 1 second? Ravi, can you come and turn off this timer? I don't know how to stop it. This was set for the original 20, okay, it stopped, thank goodness. It was set for 20 minutes, thinking, it already stopped, Ravi, thank you. It was set for 20 minutes based on when I started, but we had our technical difficulties. So here we are again. So how does Kudumbashree adhere to this node? Let me read that characteristic again, because I got distracted. Food justice characteristic node number 3 about land, creating innovative ways to control, use, share, own, manage, and conceive of land and ecologies in general that place them outside the speculative market and the rationale of extraction. I love that word, rationale of extraction. So how does Kudumbashree adhere to this node? By leasing land, which would otherwise lay fallow and useless, and assigning it to women's group farming, Kudumbashree paves the way for food justice. An important feature of group farming is that women and families now have access to the food they grow as owner cultivators. So they save what they grow for family consumption before it goes to the market, therefore placing the land and food grown by the women farmers outside the speculative market and the rationale of extraction, as Kadiyo and Slocum call it. And then there's the joy of preparing a meal which is farm to table in Western terms. And then being able to say what they grow for their family consumption encourages culturally appropriate food, which is a dimension emphasized by the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations. Women in KJLGs are well aware of the nutritional and health value of consuming fruits and vegetables grown locally in their gardens, organically, and in the field. I often heard women referring to fruits and vegetables which are not grown organically as poisonous food, and the word jaiva valam. They use jaiva valam often, and that is organic manure. Last, the Kudumbashree group farming program's utilization of land contributed to many panchayats coming up with a zero fallow land policy. So this was Kudumbashree's great contribution to justice and food justice around land in all of Kerala. Having looked at how Kudumbashree adheres to food justice nodes put forth by Kadiyo and Slocum, let's take a quick look at a few food justice initiatives in North America, just 2 of them. One is from Revision, Westwood, Colorado, USA. Revision is a community development organization which embraces a food justice discourse. 81% of Westwood's residents identify as Latinos, who are people from South America. And Westwood was a food desert. And what is a food desert? According to Wrigley et al., areas of poor access to retail provision of healthy, affordable food, where the population is characterized by deprivation and compound social exclusion. That is a food desert. So Westwood was a food desert at one time, and now has 400 backyard gardens, a cooperative grocery store housed in a pilot market called Mercadito, and the Revision program works with the help of promotoras, who are salaried staff recruited from within Westwood, who provide technical assistance and training during the growing season. Let's take Another food justice initiative in North America, the DBC-FSN, the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network. After the collapse of the auto industry in the city of Detroit, 77.7% of the residents who are African American or Black were particularly hard hit because the last major grocery store chain in the city of Detroit, Farmer Jack, was closed. Residents were driven to purchase whatever food they could get from fringe retailers, such as liquor stores, gas stations, and petrol. Gas stations, the North American word for petrol bunks, pharmacies, convenience stores, and so on. So 3 major initiatives were launched by DBC-FSN: cooperative buying, food policy development, urban agriculture. And 80% of the cooperative's members are women. And it all started, the urban farming started as a quarter-acre garden plot and was followed by urban farms in other locations. So this is another example of a striking North American food justice initiative. So what are the similarities between Kudumbashree and North American food justice initiatives in general? Because we have to be careful about lumping all the North American food justice initiatives together. We are generalizing there, but I'm doing it just for the purpose of comparison here. So both groups, that is Kudumbashree and the North American food justice initiatives, grow food in creative ways, challenge the existing food system. Both are focused on marginalized and oppressed groups. Both rely on cooperation, mutual trust, and solidarity. Both encourage family consumption first before selling, and both serve the building of agency and empowerment of the group. What are the differences between Kudumbashree and North American food justice initiatives? Approximately 69,000 KJLGs span 14 districts in Kerala. So that's the scale, whereas the North American food justice initiatives operate on a much smaller scale. Kudumbashree is the state poverty eradication mission governed by the Department of Local Self-Government. So that's the role of the government. And North American food justice, on the other hand, is run by private nonprofit organizations, and the government is involved at times in a supportive capacity. And farming together is a livelihood for Kudumbashree JLG members, but farming together provides food, but is not a livelihood necessarily in North America. And KJLGs are located in rural or semi-rural or peri-urban areas, whereas these food justice initiatives in North America are largely located in urban areas, although we cannot rule out the, hold on for a minute. I have to pull up another. We cannot rule out rural. I have to screen share, stop the share and share another slide for my references. Just give me 2 seconds here and we will do that momentarily. Okay, here we are. Today is plagued by technical difficulties, although I tried very hard to avoid them, but that's okay. Here are the references. And I mentioned them today and you heard me talk about them. I'll just leave that on for 2 seconds while I thank everybody from the bottom of my heart, particularly for being an excellent audience. And thank you, Dr. Christabel, for providing me this opportunity to present this conference in my Mathrubhumi, my beloved, cherished motherland. And I would like to thank my advisor, Dr. Richard Knopf, and my committee members, Dr. Daniel Shugurensky, Dr. Laurie Mook, and Professor Dale Larson. My heartfelt appreciations to Dr. Daniel Shugurensky, who was one of the speakers in the first International Kudumbashree Conference in 2015, and who is a cherished committee member who has helped me throughout my dissertation. Special thanks also to Dr. Brian Ashdown and Dr. Bhavani Sitaraman. Last but not least, my heartfelt gratitude and thanks to my mother, Mrs. Kamala Narayanan, whose decades of sacrifice for the family brought me to this point where I can present before you. My husband, Dr. Ravi Mahalingam, my wonderful children, my siblings and friends and family for their steadfast